Kia ora, Dame Marilyn. Thank you so much for your time this morning and for welcoming us into your home. What I wanted to do today was ask you some pretty broad questions because we're really open to sharing your life with a lot of other women who say, now tell us more about Dame Marilyn. So that's the sort of scope of this interview. So I wanted to start by asking you about when you entered Parliament. You were just 23 years old. What drew you into that realm?
I was studying political science at Victoria University, and it was different from secondary school. What can I tell you? You know, finally you got to study something that wasn't going on in the seventh form. And so I was also, though, studying music at the same time. And that's the area where I thought I would finish up. I did an honours degree in politics, and one of my old professors called me and told me there was a job going at Parliament buildings that he wanted me to apply for. And it was in what was then the opposition research unit, so National was in opposition. And I applied for the job and I got it. At the same time, I was also a member of the Women's Electoral Lobby in Wellington. There were some wonderful, feisty women leaders there. Judith Aitken, Sonia Davies, Margaret Shields, Fran Wild. And I was kind of in awe of these women who seemed to have plenty of political courage. And they had written to all the executive directors of the parties in those days, Social Credit, National, Labour, to ask them why there weren't more women candidates. And it was as if the boys had all got together for a morning coffee and decided that they would all just reply, saying we'd love to have more women, but they don't offer themselves for nomination. So 1975 dawned, International Women's Year. I thought, oh, well, I can do a bit of political activism here and I'll put my name in. I won't have a show. That's fine. And maybe then I can write a paper on National's new candidate selection procedure and move straight from an honours degree to a PhD. So I mentioned to George Gear, who I was doing the research for, that I might put my name in for Raglan. It's important to understand that National had just had 3 years in opposition from 1972 to 75 without a woman in their caucus. And an International Women's Year, that was going to draw a lot of attention. There had only ever been 13 women members of the New Zealand Parliament. George got very excited and raced off to get Sir Keith Holyoake to tell him, and the two of them turned up at my desk and said, are you serious, you know? And I said, well, I'm not especially serious, but I'm prepared to do it. So I put my name in for this electorate of Raglan, which was a very safe seat, and the last safe seat where National was choosing a candidate for the election. And I won.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, and political courage. And how did you feel when you won?
But the truth is that the moment that it was announced, I felt like I should step up to the microphone and say, look, I think there's been a dreadful mistake.
Really?
Yeah, well, I'd never contemplated that I might win.
So it was more because of International Women's Day and wanting to do some political activism, as you say, and then suddenly you've actually won.
Well, and Raglan was such a safe National seat that, yes, if you won the nomination, you were going to win the seat.
Wow. Tell me about you know, you're well known now for all the work that you've done in terms of feminist economics. Why the National Party?
Well, I was a political science student, and that meant that I'd read the constitutions of the parties. I mean, most people who go into politics probably don't bother with that sort of thing, but I had. And Labor had a rule that said effectively, at all times and on all occasions, I will vote in accordance with the majority of the caucus. And that was for both their central and local government candidates. And Parliament in the mid-1970s was full of old men. It didn't matter which side of the house you looked at, basically. And there were 4 women members of the Labor Party in office. They had successfully lobbied for New Zealand's first Select Committee on Women's Rights, except that their caucus would not allow the terms of reference to extend to either violence against women or reproductive freedom. So I think that gives you, so they had to buy into that because that's what the majority said. It gives you an idea of the nature of the patriarchy in Parliament at the time. National, on the other hand, had some history of members of Parliament crossing the floor in the past, both John Marshall, Sir Leslie Munro, these people. I knew that too because of my study. And of course, in their constitution, they talked all about liberty and freedom of thought and all of that kind of stuff. So I thought, well, that's all right. I mean, they're all just these huge concepts that you can drive a bus through, but it doesn't matter, you know. It's not a rule that says that you can't cross the floor. So that was enough, and since I didn't think I could win, that was fine.
Right. I love it. And you've mentioned that it was, you know, full of older gentlemen on everywhere you looked in Parliament in the 70s. When you stepped into that chamber for the first time, what was it like?
Well, I guess I wasn't daunted in a way because I'd worked in the buildings.
Right.
You know, and I'd been, you know, you rush information along to your spokesman, you know, when it's time, you always have the house on, you're always working with that in the background. I knew my way around the buildings, you know, which a lot of incoming MPs don't. So that part wasn't terribly daunting, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepares you for being in a party caucus as one of only 2 women in the 1970s.
No. And so what was that like?
Well, I remember the very first caucus meeting, and I slunk in and I went to sit down in the back, and George came and got me, and he put me in the seat directly in front of the Prime Minister in the front row, saying to me, "There you go, dear, you will stay here, and that way he can't ignore you." And George sat beside me.
Wow.
Yeah. And I sat there for 6 years, and then when Ruth Richardson came into caucus, I let her take that seat.
Oh. And what was it like sitting in that seat with the Prime Minister?
Well, George was quite right. It was very difficult for him to ignore me, you know, and there were all kinds of tricks about who he called in caucus to speak to anything. But if there's this person right in front of you all the time going for the call, it's very hard to ignore her.
Yeah, genius move. And
well, not my move, George's, well, but there you go.
Genius George's move. And how was it the first time that you had the opportunity to speak?
I can't really remember what it was on.
Or maybe another time that you spoke.
No, there was a culture in that caucus that you could challenge. You could challenge what a minister was saying. You could challenge one of your colleagues. I'm imagining that some of the first times I spoke would have been during the appointments part of caucus, where various bodies, whether they were commissions or committees, where government had to make appointments, and they were always overwhelmingly men. So I think that's probably one of the first spaces where I started to try and contribute. I can remember nominating Dame Alison Patterson for the Apple and Pear Marketing Board, and she became the first woman then ever appointed to an agricultural production board. I can remember nominating Sylvia Cartwright for the Commission on the Future, and she was a family lawyer in Hamilton.
Wow.
And subsequently said to me that meant I got noticed. That started the change in her career. So just little things like that all the time. I imagine that's where some of the first lots of input came.
And it just shows how important it is to have
A woman there.
Exactly.
Yeah, bringing other names to the forefront.
Yeah. Was there a moment in those early years where you thought, yes, this is exactly why I'm here?
No, because I still didn't really want to be there. However, I had a great relationship with the people of Raglan and then the people of Waipa, and that's why I was there. I mean, I was able to have a lot of trust in them, and I had no problem working for them, even if it was against one of my own ministers. So I think the very first challenge came very early in 1976 against the Minister of Works. They were building the Huntly Power Project. They thought that they'd build a trust tavern and hadn't consulted anybody. So that made it easy. That was my first big, no, I'm not happy with this. And it was very easy because it was directly from the constituency. Later, when it came to be more and more about the women's movement, it was much more difficult.
How so?
Well, largely and overwhelmingly because women had been so disconnected from parliamentary politics, because apart from the National Council of Women, who in those days represented something like 130 to 140 subsidiary member organisations, they weren't used to effecting change in a parliamentary way. The women's electoral lobby worked very hard to change a lot of that. But what it meant, I can give you a really good example. So the very first rape crisis centres were trying to be set up, and the very first women's refuges. And those women would come to me and I would say, yeah, but why to me? Because I can't move unless you convince Bill or Tony or Mike or whoever it is in your constituency about this issue. And so I remember in about my second or third year drawing attention to the need for funding. Most funding was reliant on the Lottery Board of Control monies. And Tony Friedlander standing up and saying, yes, I totally support Marilyn. And the women of New Plymouth had been to see him. And that's what made the difference, right? It was that you had to convince them for me to have any room to move at all. And there didn't have to be many of them, 4 or 5, but you had to go and tell them stories they never usually heard. And then I had somewhere to stand in that caucus.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love what you say about, it's amplifying those women's voices. Was there a moment where you thought, what the fuck am I doing here?
Oh, yeah, many times.
Give me an example.
Oh, any of the reproductive freedom debates. So there was one point, I think it was the 1977 first try of Parliament to try and make it almost impossible for women to have termination of pregnancy. And there was at one point where even an abnormality of the fetus or being raped were not grounds. And, you know, what do you do? And those are, how do you work with people who think like that? So, yeah, those were very, very tough times. Maternity leave, parental leave, you know, when in my second term I'm the only woman in the caucus and I'm being hammered, and I know that Sue Wood, who by now is National Party president, totally agrees with me, but that's not enough. You know, I'm not going to get any change in that kind of situation. So, it was constantly feeling embattled from Tuesday to Friday, and then going back to Raglan or Waipa for the Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and being put back together again, as it were, to go and do it all again the following week.
What did you do whilst you were in Wellington, like to look after yourself?
Well, mostly I ran. So I ran to work. I would go home when the house stopped sitting, which was after 10:30 at night. I had a wardrobe in the buildings, so I'd go home in my tracksuit. And so when the alarm went in the morning, before I could even think about it, I just rolled out of bed, you know, pulled the tracksuit on, put the shoes on and started running and ran to Parliament.
How far were you running?
It was a couple of K,
Wow.
but, you know, it got the endorphins going. It made me feel better.
It's kind of like Rocky in the tracksuit.
Yeah, and, well, I don't know, that was like Rocky. And then, of course, after a while there was a swimming pool in Parliament as well. So later in the day, you know, I could go and get some more exercise. But mostly you're shut in that, you know, in that building from 8 in the morning. People would call and say, well, what's the weather like? And you'd say, well, just a minute, I'll look out the window because I've got no idea, you know.
Yeah. That's so hard. And you're, what, at this stage, what, 25, 26?
Yeah, well, from 23 to 31, I was kind of
Wow.
in there. Yeah.
You've often said that evidence is like an armour or your armour. Can you tell us about a time where the data that you brought like forwarded it or shifted a debate?
Yeah, actually, just a quick one that flicks into my mind. So Bert Walker is trying to penalise women on the DPB because he's got it into his head that when they want more money, they just go and get pregnant. And, you know, and he's going to punish all the ones who won't name the father. Right. And it's because, you know, obviously they're so loose, they don't know who the father is. So this is what he's trying to tell caucus. And so I challenged the head of the Ministry of Social Development and said, I don't believe that. I think that you will find that the father has run. He's done a runner, probably to Australia, but he's done a runner, and there's no way she can find him, and I bet there's no way you can find him. Anyway, he was a good guy, used to be in Treasury, and so he said, oh, well, give me a couple of weeks. So they went through the files in the Porirua office and the Lower Hutt office, and I think the Central Auckland office, and he came back and said, you're absolutely right. Right, you know. Now, where did I get that evidence? I got that evidence from talking to women. Right, I didn't because in those days nobody collected that kind of stuff. But I just knew instinctively, as well as from these stories, so often in the years since the 70s, data has emerged to demonstrate to women what we knew anyway.
Oh my God, here, yes.
So we knew this stuff, but nobody was prepared to invest the resources into demonstrating that this was what was going on. Slowly over the last 50 years, of course, that's happened a lot more, but so often I was in that space. When we got to nuclear-free New Zealand, again, we were being told stuff like, you know, nobody will come to our defence if we're ever attacked, and a whole lot of other commitments. I went and read the ANZUS Treaty. I read every ANZUS communique that had ever been delivered from the beginning of the treaty, and it was patently obvious to me that was not what it said at all, right? So I don't know that the Prime Minister or the Minister of Defence had ever read every communique, but those were available. I could go to the Parliamentary Library and find those. So whenever there was material, I was after it. I was a researcher, and the Parliamentary Library really helped. They were fantastic because I didn't want to use the government research unit because they would then tell my colleagues what questions I was asking. And so I had to be very obscure about what I was doing.
Wow. Sort of like, yeah, I love that. Tell us about 1984.
Well, we'd established, there'd been an attempt by Richard Prebble to introduce a nuclear-free New Zealand piece of legislation. Then there was another by Gary Knapp, a social credit member of Parliament. I did a deal in caucus, and by now, in my last 3 years, younger members of Parliament, after the Helen Caldecott visits and after her movie If You Love This Planet, were getting heaps from their own children as well as from the more liberal constituencies. So my deal was, okay, well, I will vote not to have the first bill introduced, provided you set up a Disarmament and Arms Control Select Committee and that I'm part of writing the terms of reference. So you get that deal and you're looking at Muldoon's face and you can see him thinking, oh yeah, that's fine, sweet, we can do that, and then we'll just get rid of the committee.
At this stage though, surely he knows who he's up against and you.
No, I don't think he does still quite. And because in my final 3 years, okay, so in 1981, I knew it would be my final 3 years and I never told a soul. Nobody knew until quarter of the way through 1984. But there are special select committees, really. So in Parliament, a vote of confidence can lose the government its position. But that confidence is about either New Zealand's security or supply, is what they call it, so budgetary issues. And you can lose a vote in a select committee to effectively lose confidence. So I never said to the Chief Government Whip, the reasons why I want to be on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, the Disarmament and Arms Control Select Committee, and the Public Expenditure Committee is so I'm there in case there's something I vote against that proves to be a confidence issue. But so I was manoeuvring already at that point. None of that ever came to pass, but I was preparing. Muldoon thought that at the end of a parliamentary session, usually the whip puts a motion before the House that this select committee or that select committee, the business of these select committees will be carried over, and these select committees, that business will die or the select committee will die. And I knew that that would happen. So just before we got to the end of each year, I would say to the chairman, who was Doug Kidd, "Now, Mr. Chairman, can you assure the committee that we will not be lost in the motion that's moved at the end of the year, you know?" And he would say, yes, of course, we'll be continuing. So when the chief government whip came to me to say the boss says we're going to lose this, I would say, well, I'll have to raise a point of order with the Speaker because that the Chair has misled the committee because he has assured us all that it will continue.
Oh my God,
So,
you're a genius.
No, it's just knowing how to use the place. You know, so another one was in, I think, 83 maybe. Reproductive freedom legislation was mad. We'd ferried many women to Australia. It was a nightmare, but they still weren't satisfied. And Anne Herkes came to my room one evening, closed the door and put something on my desk in front of me. And I never knew where she got it, but I suspect it was from Longy trying to save Parliament from what was about to happen. So it was a private member's bill from Doug Kidd seeking to make termination even more difficult. And she said, "So what can you do?" And I said, "Well, why aren't you doing it?" And she said, "Well, the boss says," meaning Longy, "that none of us are to go anywhere near it." But obviously they wanted it killed. Now, by now, you know your colleagues, and they're so predictable, right? So Kidd was elected the session after me, so I would have seniority. I had about 3 hours, and I knew that the rules were that if I could get a private member's bill approved by the Clerk of the House before midnight, I would get precedence over Kidd in introducing the bill, and that Parliament would fold and vote them both out. You know, whatever they thought, that's what they would do. So I raced down to the clerk's office where I had several friends, and Beth Bowden was working there then too, of course. And I got one friend there to help me draft an amendment to the Crimes Act. And he was, you know, getting very particular. And I said, "It doesn't matter, Laurie, it's a device. I don't really care what it says. It's just a device, so that there's two." So that was a Wednesday night. Thursday morning, went to caucus. After a while, Doug Kidd's up telling us this bill is going to be introduced, and I stood and I argued against it, and a lot of other people argued against it. And then the Prime Minister says, "Oh, it's a conscience issue, Mr. Kidd can go ahead." So I stood up and said, "Well, Prime Minister, I'll have to tell you there'll be two bills, and because I have seniority, mine will be first." And he looked and said, "Oh, but Miss Waring, you don't have a bill," you know. And so I was able to say, "Yes, I do actually." Was approved at the clerk's office before midnight yesterday, and I actually thought on his face was an expression of admiration because I was going to get them all out of a hole, you know.
Yeah.
So, but you had to, there was no rest.
No.
You had to be just on your toes all the time. And Mike Minogue had described it to me. He said our business as members of Parliament was to spin 360 every day to make sure that even worse things weren't happening.
Wow.
And that's how it felt.
Yeah. And so just to go back to 1984, and your role in that little snap election.
Well, so by now the Disarmament and Arms Control Select Committee has been sitting for a while.
Yeah.
We've got loads of evidence from all over the place. It's perfectly obvious that the line that the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defence have been pushing is, you know, it's not justified by the treaty or by communiques or anything else. And yes, sure, so Foreign Affairs is very worried there'd be trade reprisals and all of that, but so what, you know. And so there's going to be another bill introduced to the House. I'm going to support it, but something else happens. So the night before it's introduced, David Thompson, who's the leader of the House, comes to visit me. And he says, oh, well, there's a standing order that says that where Parliament might support legislation that endangers New Zealand's security, the executive, the cabinet, can withhold that from going to the Governor-General for signature. And I looked at him and I said, you mean in this democracy, you're telling me that if a majority of Parliament passes this legislation, you're going to refuse to send it to the Governor-General? And he affirmed that. And I said, David, I think you better leave. That's outrageous. And I don't know what you're doing in the National Party if that's what you think. You know, because hello, freedom and liberty and democracy and all the good things we're supposed to stand for. And I thought that would be it. And I could not believe it. The next day we're in the House and the Speaker, so Thompson's gone straight from me to the Speaker. Speaker's supposed to be independent. The Speaker's on his feet, drawing attention of the House to this particular Speaker's ruling and standing order that says that this can happen. And the bill hadn't even been introduced at that point. The bill is being introduced and I'm sitting there in my seat and saying to myself, I don't care what the result of this introduction is. That's it. I'm over. That's the end of the road. I've hit the wall. If that's what you think this Parliament is supposed to do, I don't want to be any part of it. So, in fact, we lost the vote. I mean, it all gets lost in the simplicity of saying cross the floor, government fell, because cross the floor and the government did fall very quickly. But it wasn't because we lost the vote. So I went home that night and I mind mapped all night. I did not sleep. And it was, so if I could retire, I could withdraw from the caucus, yes. I could resign from the party, yes. I could resign as the MP, you know, all of these. And I just mind mapped what all the options were and what they all looked like and which ones would give me more choices if the first option didn't work, etc. So I decided that the main option was to withdraw from the National Party caucus. That would withdraw me from those three key select committees, but I thought, because we only had a majority of one, and I would enjoy the schmozzle every week with them now trying to cover me on all the select committees. I would get all these mornings off.
More jogging?
Yeah, totally, swimming, whatever. So that would be my first move, and that meant I wasn't resigning from the party, because for me the party were the people of Waipa, not the great National Party. And it was caucus that wasn't performing properly, right, of all of these things. So I wrote the memo to the whip saying I was withdrawing, and actually I went off to a violin masterclass at Victoria University.
As you do.
Well, because I wasn't going to caucus, you know.
Yeah.
And it was later, when I came back, nothing had happened. And apparently the memo to the whip didn't get opened until late afternoon, you see. So I'm sitting there thinking, oh, well, they've called my bluff. That's clever of them, you know. But no, they hadn't. They just hadn't opened the envelope. And then all hell broke loose, you know. So then Sue Wood's flying down to Wellington and Barry Lay's coming in and, you know, it's, yeah. I was out at dinner with a group of reproductive freedom advocates. It's hilarious at the moment when you think, so there was Dame Barbara Goodman, there was Dame Honor Bonish, there was Lady Beverly Scott, Brenda Cutress, and we were all meeting because we thought that during election campaigns the right wing, the anti-abortion lot, always got ahead. And so we were strategising about what could we do in the forthcoming election campaign to make that different. So we'd all met out to dinner. Then we were all still in my office meeting, and when we came back from the dinner, there were notes all over my desk, and I thought, aha, so it's been
Someone's
opened.
read the memo.
It's been opened now. And then soon after that, I got the call to go to the whip's office. Yeah, and as a result of that meeting, Muldoon pulled the plug and the government fell.
Oh my gosh, you're amazing. And then everything changed for you and for New Zealand as well.
Yeah, yeah.
It's kind of amazing sitting in your presence, actually, thinking about that.
No, well, you know, I mean, many things changed, didn't they? I mean, Roger Douglas became Minister of Finance, so that wasn't all that jolly.
Not exactly.
But
no,
Muldoon had driven the country into the ground.
Yeah, yeah. I just wanted to ask you some questions about your work in the feminist economic space, because you're incredibly well known for that. And I was wondering about, like, when did you realise that women's work wasn't being counted? Did you have a light bulb moment or anything like that?
Well, I was on the what was then called the Public Expenditure Committee, which is now called the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee. And a piece of we rarely dealt with legislation. And a piece of legislation came to the committee, and it was about amending our national accounting framework to update it in accordance with something from 1968, you know, so immediately we're updating at least 10 years late. What on earth is this? I'd never heard of the system of national accounts. So I began to take an inordinate interest in it, particularly when I discovered this thing called the boundary of production, which excluded pretty much all unpaid work, overwhelmingly women's work, from the national accounts. And GDP is derived from the national accounts. Most of the data that you use for your forecasts for budgets, etc., is pretty dependent on this. And there's a very simple equation that operates in the budget planning and process, which is if you're invisible as a contributor in a nation's economy, then you're going to be invisible in the distribution of benefits. So no wonder it was so hard to argue for childcare provision, because all those women weren't doing anything anyway. They had plenty of time to take care of kids, So, yeah, and I can remember asking one of the Treasury officials to come and talk to me about it, because I thought, I must be missing something. It cannot be like this. How can it be like this? And for him to come and say, no, you're absolutely right, that's exactly what it does and what it says.
Wow.
He then said to me, my wife gave me the women's room to read for last Christmas. I do understand.
Good on you, mate. You're doing anything about it. Wow. And that was the real kind of point, I suppose, for you to really start digging into this and start thinking about this more, or?
Well, the first newspaper clippings that I then started to, obviously I just started to get a bit focused on this. When I came to write Counting for Nothing, the first clippings were from 1977. So from then on, or asking questions in the house, or things like that. So I got particularly engaged in the value of unpaid work on farms done by women because of, the nature of my constituencies. So, and it just grew from there, really.
And so tell us about writing Counting for Nothing. What were you hoping the impact would be?
Well, I knew I had to go and read the rules on the system of national accounts. So when the guy from Treasury had come to visit me, I said to him, well, can I read these? Do we have a copy of this in New Zealand? Thinking to myself, this is way pre-internet. There'd be a fairly decent-sized volume to get my hands on. And he came back to me later and said, no, there's no copy of them in New Zealand. And by the way, it's encyclopedic. There are these many volumes. And I said to him, well, get them for me from Australia, because, Australia must have it. It's just us that doesn't have it. Anyway, a month or two later, he came back and said, well, they're not in Australia either. And so I said to him, you mean there are these rules which every nation state has to use to run their accounting framework, but nobody ever has to read the rules? And he said, well, the rules are in New York.
I see where this is going.
Yeah. So once I'd, retired, and then, there was an early election, I thought, well, I'll go to New York and I'll read these rules. So I was writing a proposal for Counting for Nothing, and that got accepted. I was really lucky, not just in New Zealand, Australia, but, with some big publishers like Macmillan and Harper and Row and people. So that gave me some money to go and live there and to go and read the accounts. And when I arrived there and got shown these encyclopedic shelves, truly, of these accounts, and the deputy UN librarian, Katerina Bovan, saying to me, well, apart from Richard Stone, who wrote them, in all my years here, nobody's ever come to look at them. So I went there, far left, and I started with volume 1 of 1953, and I just read them until I'd read to the end of 1968. And it was harrowing. It was appalling. It was every day. Some days I sat there and cried. Yeah. When you read that the work of women, I'm not using all their highfalutin language there, but so we're called non-producers. So all the way through, you have to look at what's going on for households and non-producers, right? And the work of non-producers is of little or no importance. Well, if you want to read something that sticks a bomb under you, that makes you furious, that says there's a book here, it's to find that line very early in the 53 volumes. And yeah, so that's when I wrote Counting for Nothing, but I started really focusing on unpaid work. But then you realise, hell, this is happening to the whole ecosystem as well, you know, except when it's being exploited, when it's just sitting there doing all the service work that it does, like oxygen and habitats and, you know, pollination and things. It's worth nothing. But when we're mining it or cutting it or otherwise despoiling it, overfishing it, it's all fine for the market. To find out things like, oh no, as long as the money passes through the market, it's all fine. So all illegal trades in munitions and drugs and endangered species and people now, trade in people is huge. That's all good for growth, that all counts. That motor vehicle accidents are great for growth because you need to replace the vehicles. You know, that when you start to see the pathology that lies underneath this vehicle as well, and to also recognise that you've just served in a parliament where nobody who was making the rules understood this. And this is probably saturating every other parliament in the world as well. People are not understanding this. You find the occasional exception, like Robert Kennedy did understand it, but not many people in elected office. The other thing that is really important is that I found out that these figures are constructed by statisticians, and statisticians know what is wrong with them, but they produce the figures that then get sent to economists who don't know what is wrong with them, and so then work with them. And there's the conversation about, hey, you really shouldn't be reading that into those because there's this problem going on, or because we've used, you know, very creative proxies that hardly represent, you know, the actual pollution or whatever it happens to be. So that conversation doesn't happen. So finance ministries and treasuries just go on their merry way using this material that is highly sus.
Absolutely. And when you started telling people this material is highly sus, how did they react?
Well, women understood it immediately because it's part of that, you know, we already knew that, but it's nice that you now give us the time use surveys to demonstrate what we already knew. And so women knew it, statisticians knew it. I guess the biggest pushback that I got was inside the academic economics profession. Surprise, surprise. Who very few of whom had ever read the national accounts, of course, as you can understand. But, you know, this was a threat to all that they held dear. So, yeah, I got a lot of pushback, and consequently years later was always incredibly amused to hear them spouting my position, you know.
Oh, the old...
Yeah.
We understand that. You, I was really also interested in, actually just on that, was there one stat or one, you know, number that really stood out for you?
Well, there's a conundrum, right? Time use data demonstrates again and again that women's unpaid work is the single largest sector of any nation's economy. The problem is that economists who can't cope with having two different data series can't make judgments. Economists are a real problem at this. Then wanted to attribute market values to all that unpaid work. And when they made the attributions, of course, they were always at either the women's wage rate for cleaning kitchens or whatever, you know, always the lowest pay scale, always only 40 hours a week, which always made me laugh. It was hilarious. Like, you think we could do all that in 40 hours? You must be joking. Even though we do loads of things simultaneously. You know, I'd be walking around saying, oh, yeah, and how about double time and triple time and holiday pay and sick leave and superannuation contributions? You know, if you're really going to estimate what it's worth, it would be nice if you estimated properly what it was worth. And an Australian economist, Duncan Ironmonger, heard me the first time I said that. And he developed household input-output tables, and he was able to demonstrate in the Australian economy that women's unpaid work was worth 10 times the value of all manufacturing in Australia and 3 times the value of all mining and mineral extraction.
Whoa.
Yeah, so like now we're starting to get... But he is doing that by using the average annual salary for all Australians, because he says, yeah, I've heard you, I've got it straight away. I also am hearing the inequity of the various hourly rates that people are using. Another woman in the OECD was doing work on a lot of unpaid subsistence production in fishing, in agriculture, etc., which was, you know, happening for women in most parts of the so-called developing world. And there'd been a few time use surveys around, but it became very obvious very quickly that I could say, we're talking about the single largest sector of a nation's economy. So do you want to do a budget, New Zealand, and leave out dairying? Because, you know, that's what you're saying. It's of no importance at all. I was just doing some figures the other day, and I was looking at the number of volunteer hours that all New Zealanders do on an annual basis, and it adds up to more than 5 million 40-hour weeks.
Whoa.
But it's worth, at the living wage was the particular wage rate that I used. So in any year, the value of volunteering in New Zealand is equal to the entirety of our milk powder export.
Wow.
But it's not important, you see. So we don't take it into account in our budgets.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Minister of Finance, Ms Willis, thinks that that's a bit soft, you know, and no, we don't need to care about that.
No, exactly. I've got 2 more questions for you. I just wanted to ask you about, do you think pay equity is possible in this current capitalist system?
Yes, I do think it is. And it just requires some more fiscal room, actually, you know, and we have plenty of fiscal room in this country. I mean, when I was on the Reserve Bank board, each year some very internationally reputable central bankers would be invited to come to New Zealand to spend 3 months here, give some lectures at Vic, but look at our economic settings, as it were, and to advise us if there was something that we should be looking at or that we were doing wrong. Every one of them always said, you're missing a capital gains tax. And they were not lefties. And right at the moment, the International Monetary Fund, which is hardly a left-wing institution, is busy telling New Zealand you need a capital gains tax. So we've got plenty of fiscal room to pay for this. even without, subsidies to the tobacco industry and landlords. And, I don't know why everybody still thinks our agricultural industry is not subsidised. We all pay for their carbon emissions. It's subsidised, So, but yes, there's plenty of room and we can afford it.
Great. My last question is, if a young woman today said, I want to make a difference in the world, but the system feels too big to change, what would you say to her?
Okay, number one, the real first act of defiance is to think you can change it. You must never let it intimidate you into thinking you are powerless. So number one is don't say that again, and start trying to find things where you can make some kind of impact. And it might be, in the easy first ways of, signing the petition, holding the placard, going, yes, I know they're tedious and boring, to the election meetings that candidates are holding and standing up every time and asking them questions they hate, which is not necessarily, about pay equity, but it is about, if you're elected and you're in government, you'll have to be in a coalition. Why should I believe any word you say? Because you're going to make a coalition agreement and you're not going to perform in the way in which you're assuring me right now you will, unless you're prepared to cross the floor. So is that going to happen? They're just those kinds of things all the time, and always pick the meet the candidates meetings when there are 3 or 4 of them on the stage, so just stuff like that. But, become a bit of a nerd and become a nuisance.
A nerd and a nuisance. I love that.
Yeah.
Maybe a good description of yourself, Marilyn.
Yeah.
A brilliant one. I do want to just ask a couple more questions then about pay equity. And could you tell us how this People's Select Committee came about?
Well, I imagine, like lots of other women around the country, there was the shock of hearing it was coming. And I don't watch Parliament. Really, I've got better things to do. But I turned it on, especially when they were going to take urgency. And I was just dumbfounded. I could not believe what was happening. The level of ignorance that was obvious in any speaker from the government side, the desperation of the opposition to have them listen, wait, anything, the amendments just up and up and up that Ayesha Verrill and others were just doing. And then my phone started, with Karenina Sulmayo, I think, was the first one through, and she was the previous EEO commissioner. And just, oh my God, are you watching and listening? What is this? What are we going to do? So at first there was the kind of despairing calls backwards and forwards and text between each other. Are you watching this? Sort of thing. And just horror about it all. Then the next day, I think, was when Kirsten Windelow sent me the email, and I just knew her from, the PSA would have book readings for me, especially when it was around unpaid work and stuff. So I knew her from there, and she was just saying, well, we're all just up against the wall here. There's the petition, there are the demonstrations, but have you got any idea about anything else we might be doing? And by then, I'd heard Sue Bradford the night before on Radio New Zealand, almost speechless with, being so upset. And then Karenina had drawn attention to the fact that she and Jackie Blue and Judy McGregor had joined with Gail Pachenko to put out a media statement from the 4 women who had been EEO commissioners. So there I saw Jackie's name there. And then I had the email, and so all the time I just kept saying to myself, how can we provide a vehicle for the evidence that should have been before Parliament? Because the petitions and the demonstrations don't do that. And pay equity is complex, and it requires time, and it requires narrative, right? So what could you do? And I'm saying to myself, well, the normal vehicle is a select committee. And then I was thinking to myself, well, maybe we should have a people's select committee. So this was all going while I was doing laps in the pool.
I love that. Yeah.
And so I came back and I called Sue, and she was like anything. And I called Jackie, and she was, oh, that's an interesting idea. And then in my phone I had Leanne, so I called Leanne, and she was kind of on, and I'm thinking to myself, well, that's 4.
How many do you need?
How many do you need? Well, you know, maybe I only need another 6, right? And then the next part is very funny too, because I was going to have to go to the Featherston Booktown, and to get everybody's email addresses or phone numbers, I'm now in touch with Bessie Sutherland, because Bessie is the secretary of the former MPs Association. So I would call her and say, Bessie, I need Joe Hayes' contact details, but you can feel free to give them mine, you know. So now all of a sudden Joe's calling me, you know, and I'm just getting these names, and I'm start sending emails to Kirsten and say, well, we're up to 5, you know. And then...
is this in a day, or what are we talking?
48 hours or something, you know.
Okay. Mobilising, I love it.
And so I'm sending these messages to Bessie. On about the 3rd or 4th ask, she's been just very straight, just sending it back to me. And she's starting to, you know, something going on here. So in the next email, she says something about, you know, being a bit upset with the government, and that she'd retired from Parliament. I thought she was still working in the Parliamentary Library, but she wasn't. So then my next email was to come clean with her. Okay, Bessie, you know, you've got a sniff, there's something going on here. This is what I'm trying to do. And we'll need a parliamentary researcher. Are you on for that? I had no idea she lived in the Wairarapa, so there I am at Booktown signing books, and she's standing right in front of me and saying, well, I thought I'd just come and tell you yes.
Oh, wow.
You know, so then we've got her. Then I've got the 10 names that are kind of mirroring the balance of the House, and every single person has been go. Like, it hasn't been, I'll have to think about it, I'll let you know. No.
Like, yep, I'm here.
Right. So, yes, so we've got those numbers, and so I'm saying this to Kirsten, and then I'm saying, well, I think we've got a People's Select Committee, you know, that we can go. So then I went to Wellington to make the announcement.
Is this the first ever time a People's Select Committee has been done?
I think so. I've got no idea, but nobody's come along and said, well, there's been another one. There have been groups holding hearings through New Zealand that weren't all ex-MPs and weren't using select committee procedure in the past before.
Yeah, but nothing like this.
No. But this is what I know how to do, and it's what the other 9 know how to do as well.
And it's your point about the evidence being so important and using the process to actually make the change.
Yeah, to mirror the process that would have happened. And I already know that in addition to the debates in the House, that there are going to be heaps of official information inquiries,
Yeah.
that there'll be estimates, debates, that there'll be questions in the House. So I'm not worried about not getting the other side. There's going to be plenty from the other side to justify why they thought they were doing this.
How many submissions have you got?
1,638, I think.
Wow.
And the last select committee on pay equity, so the 2018 hearings, had 660. But so I go to Wellington, I make the announcement we're going to set it up, and within an hour of that, my emails it starts with people just coming in saying, what can I do? How can I help? What a great idea, etc. So the very first thing that we did was I wanted the 660 submissions from the last time analysed. So I just farmed them out, 40 to you, 50 to you, 40 to you, 50 to you, etc. And within a week, everybody had done the analysis.
Wow.
To come back and say, well, this was their point of view, this is who it was on behalf of, these are the people we think you should hear again. Like, that was something I was really after. Who's there who we know would have made a submission this time, and we can write to them and invite them to make a submission. Then the website gets set up, for submissions to come in. And then Len Cook's in touch with me, the former New Zealand Director General of Statistics New Zealand, saying, well, any numbers I can crunch, I'm happy to do this for you. I'm in touch with Karenina again, Someo, because we don't have a Pacific representative on the select committee when he wasn't available, for example. So I said, we're going to need a Pacific advisor. So she's in. And then I was sitting there thinking, God, it would be great to have a committee clerk. I could ring Beth, who was also on my phone, but I know she's full-time, busy, and I swear 3 hours later the phone went and it was Beth saying, I think you need a committee clerk.
Oh, wow.
So that happened, like, it was just phenomenal. And then I would start ringing people saying, we need to hear from you as a submitter.
Yeah.
And I made all kinds of calls to people who immediately took the call. Like, that was just what was so amazing.
I mean, like, if Marilyn Waring calls, I don't know many people who are not going to take the call.
Well,
let's just be honest about that.
Well, I don't know. It wasn't anything I'd had to test before.
Well,
but,
I mean, look.
But it certainly happened, yeah.
Wow. Well, we're looking forward to kind of following the process of the select committee and understanding what the evidence is, because, as you say, being a bit of a nerd and a bit of a nuisance can actually make real change.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that, lies absolutely inside me is I've spent so much time in my life talking about the value of women's work. And to have the government suggest to me, this is what it feels like, through this legislation, that the people who care for the most vulnerable New Zealanders at the beginning of their lives, at the end of their lives, and those with major disabilities throughout their lives, that this government thinks so little of that work that they would pass this legislation. It's just anathema to me.
Thank you, Marilyn.